Hello, everyone. Welcome to Inspiring Idea Podcast. Today's guest is someone who is not from a conventional technology background. However, he got intrigued with AI, which led him to take this path of self learning about AI and its practical implementation across industries. Today, we would like to discover his learning journey and what tips he has for people who wants to take a similar path. Please welcome Vibhav Mithal. Welcome to the show. How are you going?
Hi, Abhinav. Hi, Madhu. It's an absolute pleasure to be here and think on AI, think on everything else that we'd like to discuss.
That's great. Let's start the show. Vibhav, can you share your life journey and what decisions that you have taken to who you are today?
Thanks, Abhinav. So just for everyone and for the listeners, I am an intellectual property rights lawyer based out of New Delhi, India. I practice intellectual property rights litigation. I'm currently associated with Anand and Anand, which is one of India's top IP firms. In terms of decisions, I think so one interesting point that I want to make on decisions is I think no decision is it's not a linear path. I think it's a culmination of decisions on various factors. But if you look at it, but if I try to make it as a linear path from one point A to point B, a couple of things have defined me who I am. One obviously is the decision to do actually one of the main decisions is in school. As a matter of fact, I took up commerce instead of science, and that led me to foray into theater, which is very relevant when we come to IP. Then I went and chose and did law. That was primarily based on the fact that I mean, I have parents who are doctors, and you have engineers. In any case, in India, it's a chosen profession by birth for many. But the point is that it had the comfort of a professional degree, so we went and chose law. Instinctively, wanted to do law. Moved on, went on to and went and got selected in the national test and made it to one of India's top law schools, National University of Juridical Sciences, Calcutta. Connecting back to what I initially said, is that my interest in theatre, and which resulted because I took commerce in 11th and 12th and was slightly more relaxed compared to science students. People from Indian audiences will understand what that means. Is that it allowed me to direct, script write a significant amount of plays. And when I entered fourth year of law school, which is a 5 year course usually, it introduced me to the legal side of the creative field, about
Mhm.
about inventions, creativity, and music labels and script writers. And it opened a different field, and that led me to IP law. At that time we had a fantastic faculty as well at my law college, one of the best faculties in the country at that point of time. That led to learning more. Basically, as a student, you learn and you pick up things only through your subjects. That led to Anand and Anand, and then Anand and Anand metamorphosed that academic interest in intellectual property into a practical approach, because what I'm doing fundamentally as an IP lawyer is I'm a litigator. I practice before courts. I appear before the Delhi High Court. I appear before the Supreme Court. Our goal is to get across to the judge. And you could be arguing yourself, you could be assisting a senior to do it, but the goal is to get across to the judge in the time frame that the judge has. And closing into that, so we did practice. I've been in practice for 7 years, built onto that with an LLM in IP, and that has now shifted towards a curiosity and interest in artificial intelligence.
That was my next question. So all along, from whatever we have heard so far, that what comes up clearly is your curiosity, right? So curiosity is the one that I teach my kids all the way. Ask questions. Whatever you do, ask questions. Ask why. Being a Simon Sinek fan, ask why. So when did this curiosity on AI start? Logically, we are going to the next question, which is
Right.
your AI. So talk to us.
Right. No, thank you. No, I think curiosity is a very important. There's one thing I actually read, and it's something I tell my juniors also sometimes at work, is that more important than finding the answer sometimes when you're starting out is asking the question. Because if you don't ask the right question, you're not going to it's not going to head in that correct direction, or any direction, as a matter of fact. Coming to AI, I think the curiosity for artificial intelligence, the buzzword started coming around in 2018, 2019 when I was back from my LLM. But the thing about artificial intelligence, which really intrigued me, and it again connects very well to my intellectual property journey, is that you do not realize intellectual properties around you till you know of the concept, like the shirt that I'm wearing, the headphones that I'm on, I'm on the headset I'm wearing right now, or the watch that I might have, or the pen that I might use, is all intellectual property in some way or the other. Same way, artificial intelligence is exactly like that. If you are not aware of what artificial intelligence really is and how it is being applied to you, or rather conversely, when you realize what artificial intelligence is, you realize it's all around you. You just need to be
Mhm.
aware of it. And for me, the turning point really was in the journey was about starting to read, because of my curiosity, I tend to read a lot. So I read a lot of articles on artificial intelligence. I have someone in the family also who's a little bit who's on the technology side, so I used to keep interacting with him, and then from there I ended up attending an event in on AI from a community called MKAI, Milton Keynes Artificial Intelligence, and that led to a lot of other things. So basically, MKAI and a lot of other events just to understand the field and just to break it down. And I think curiosity just led one thing to another, and I ended up getting into AI, just trying to figure out what this field is really about. And it's been over a year, more than a year, in this journey, and then the process is ongoing.
Yeah.
That's really
So
good.
you've heard about FOMO. Have you heard about FOMO? Fear of missing
uh,
out,
yes, yes,
right?
of
So
course, of
that
course.
is that is that is one thing which most of us, including us, right, are trying to avoid. Where we try to learn AI as much as we can, and that's how we see the birth of Inspiring Ideas podcast as well. So we talk to different people all over the world. So, couple of questions, Vibhav, in terms of, can people just ignore AI, right? And secondly, let's talk about how people can actually embrace AI, and why would they? Why would you think that they should learn AI?
Excellent questions, Madhu. I think people. The first question: can people ignore AI? Is that the first question, right?
Yeah,
I don't think it's possible. AI is all pervasive. Let me break this down and answer this by expanding a little bit what I understand AI. And for the audiences, it's very important to understand. I have a non-technical background, which means I am not an engineer. I'm not even a
fantastic.
business person looking forward for a business case of AI. I'm actually a lawyer, as I just indicated, curious about AI. And the goal here is to demystify AI for everyone from my particular skill set. Why I say AI cannot be ignored is connected to a very simple concept to what is AI. AI has to be understood in a very simple manner as two tracks: what AI is today and how we articulate AI generally. Let's answer the second one first. What is AI? How is AI being articulated generally? There is The artificial intelligence actually is a misnomer. The word intelligence seems to constantly indicate that machines are going to be as intelligent as human beings. That might be the goal, right? But what AI is today, and that's a concept called artificial general intelligence, sentient machines versus humans, a constant Terminator scenario, Space Odyssey scenario, maybe Westworld. I haven't seen too much of the show, but probably where machines and humans are similar at the same level, one versus one. But that's not what artificial intelligence is currently. This is concept is known as artificial general intelligence. What is AI today? AI, very simply, is task specific. It is a pattern recognition tool. You take mass amounts of data, you train the algorithm on that data. The algorithm identifies patterns, and from those patterns, identifying those patterns makes future decisions. A very simple example, again, to simplify this concept, let for example you're building an AI system to distinguish whether the email is a spam email or it's a legitimate email, and you want to keep it in your inbox. Spam email needs to go to the spam folder. How would you do it? You create a data set where you identify a spam email and you identify a legitimate email, which means you identify what you're feeding the AI system, which is the input, and you identify the output, which is the legitimate email, and you train the system on both ways. This is in very simple, from a non-technical person in a technical parlance. This is called supervised learning. right? So it's basically, and what will happen is, then you're feeding the AI system with that data. It will identify a pattern, it'll learn is an important term here. Learn which email is spam, learn which email is not spam, which email is legitimate. This concept of learn, the ability of an AI system to pick up from its environment and make that pattern identification, a pattern recognition, is the learning ability. And why, and I understand from a technical, non-technical standpoint, again, why that is relevant is that earlier you would have human beings, no, so earlier you would have human beings coding a particular result for an algorithm, for a computer to perform a function. Here what you're doing is you're providing a data set, you're giving an input, emails labeled as spam and legitimate, and I want an output where I only want legitimate emails, I do not want spam. So you've given an input, you've given an output, and how the machine is moving from A to B is limited only to the machine, which is also, we're digressing here, but a little bit of like a black box problem. It's like you're doing mathematics, you have this problem, you have the solution, how you did the working you don't know. So
Mhm.
simply put, AI is today a pattern recognition tool, and therefore you cannot ignore it, because it is going, this mechanism of AI will keep following everywhere. It's a tool that can help you automate your tasks. It comes in Netflix recommendations, and in healthcare, in different sectors, in different parts of the job. So we have to look at it in this way. And I'm sorry, Madhu, could you just tell me your second question, and I'll quickly
The
answer that
second
as well.
question, is it more organic? Wonderful explanation of what is AI, right? So with a
Right.
practical example of email, I'm more interested in, say, there are a lot of people who say, I can just ignore. AI will come and teach me what I should be doing to improve my standard of living. Why would I go back and learn about AI? I'm not going to
That's an
miss anything, should I? Or should I not?
Now, that's a very, very important question. It actually touches on the concept of AI ethics. We need to understand what AI is today. AI is being used in healthcare. I'll explain it through examples and why it's relevant for everyone to know about AI.
Yeah,
For
absolutely.
example, let's talk about healthcare. Healthcare, like we said, that you feed in data, you get an output. Let's say I take radiology scans for detecting cancer, and I train the algorithm for that aspect of analyzing a radiology scan for detecting cancer. And you train the algorithm on that, or you train it on lots of images of a particular eye disease, and from those analysis of those images, the AI system decides whether you have eye disease or not. Third, let's say, for example, you create an algorithm to determine whether a person can reoffend or not, and you train it on a particular data set. So the point here is that because of the way AI is functioning currently, it is being applied in various areas automatically that are already impacting our daily life. Artificial intelligence is a general purpose technology, steam engine, electricity. It's going to impact us at home, it's going to impact us in our work, and it's already doing so. So therefore, as a person, as a layman, as someone who's not in AI, or is not in thinking on AI, it is important for you to be aware on AI, because tomorrow it could, your normal processes, you could be applying for a bank loan, you could be watching movies on Netflix, as a matter of fact, you could be listening to music on Spotify, on your phone, everything, all those recommendation algorithms, you could be streaming through your social media and liking something. All of those things are determined by algorithms, and they are defining who and what you see. And therefore, being aware of how AI is operating currently is extremely important. Because, and I want to expand this like a minute more to explain, because if you know what AI is today, we'll begin a conversation on AI ethics. One AI, and I'm not going to get too deep into this, is that AI ethics, one is the ethics of humans developing AI systems, but more where the question is coming from, Madhu, is the perspective of society, of an individual. If we are not aware of what AI is today, as citizens, as people, we will not expect ethical responsibility, ethical development of algorithms. Therefore, it is important for us, we can't wait for AI to come to us. We need to know broadly what AI is today, because that component of knowing what is AI today is important, at least in my perspective, an important facet, subset, element of developing ethical AI, which is in a responsible, ethical manner, which benefits everyone mankind as a whole.
Sure. Thank you. Think Abhi and I normally talk about ethics, right? So we understand what ethics is, being working for corporations all the time. For layman, what is ethics? What is AI ethics, and why do you think it is important? Sorry, I'm
Right.
asking a lot of questions. I should give chance to Abhi as well, but I'll go with this question. I'm so intrigued with some of the answers that you're giving.
Right. So AI ethics again is it's a very simple explanation. So as we've discussed, so to be able to explain AI ethics, I need like I'll just give a 10-second prelude to how AI is being developed right now. AI is being developed by human beings through various technical mechanisms. For those interested in learning more, those terms are machine learning is the most common way in machine learning. There's supervised learning, there's unsupervised learning, there's reinforcement learning. The key point in this is that humans are involved in this process of creating an algorithm. What ethical AI then means is ethical AI is not, and this is important, ethical AI is not about the moral status of artificial intelligence as an autonomous entity by itself. Ethical AI is about the ethical choices that humans involved in the creation of AI and algorithms are making. So ethical AI is the larger perspective that they have in mind. That's a very simple way of trying to get this across. Is that this larger context they have in mind when they're creating an algorithm. Let's take another example. For example, we discussed earlier in this show right now that data is the starting point of all algorithms. Now, for example, I am, though this has been significantly controversial in the globe, I am developing an algorithm to predict for predictive policing. I decide that I'm sure there's a shortage of manpower, there's a shortage of police personnel. I want to use an algorithm to determine which neighborhoods in for the area in which I'm developing the algorithm have a high crime rate and a low crime rate. Now I have to feed it in data. Now when I feed in data, I there's a concept in like in from an ethical standpoint, know your data, know the context of your data. You're collecting data and there's a historical, and you have an existing data set, maybe the existing police reports, the existing data on police crimes, and that then favors or is biased against a particular community.
Hmm.
Now when I'm developing that algorithm, I would need to be at least be aware of this historical bias, at least, or when I see the data to develop the algorithm, I need to be aware of this fact. Because if I'm not aware of this bias, or if I'm not aware of the fact that the bias can creep into the system because of biased data, then what will happen is I could take this biased data where the data favors one community over other in terms of crime rates, and I develop that algorithm, and then that inequality or that bias gets embedded in the algorithm, and which only makes the inequality or the bias against this particular community worse. Which
Hmm.
is
Yeah.
why when you're looking at ethical AI, you need to understand that it's the ethical choices, the larger purpose that people who are developing the algorithms must take in mind. Because if you ignore those, if you're not aware, solving is one part of the problem. I'm talking here about awareness. If you're not aware of it, it could lead to different rather unfavorable consequences, which no developer, anyone developing AI would like to, but they would, I mean, anyone would
Mm.
like to avoid.
Yeah, that's great. So
Thank
you
you.
talked about a lot of things. You talked about your understanding of AI. You talked about so many practical examples of how we are using AI, and we may not be even be aware about it. Like the example you gave about Netflix. The question I have is that people who are coming from non-technology background or industries, right? And we are looking that AI is getting used in so many areas now. So if there's a small scale industry, or sole traders or whatever, if they want to see that what opportunities that they can use in terms of using AI for their business, what do you think are the important things they should observe or try to learn?
That's, and again, a fantastic question. I think that the answer to this in a very simple way, again, I'm sorry, this the word simple keeps coming in every time. I'm just trying to really tie it back to my understanding of the situation. It's, I think it's a combination of business need, a business objective, and the data that you have. See, one very fundamental aspect while answering it for answering this question is that AI is, and from what I understand, an artificial intelligence system cannot be made or designed by just throwing data. It's not like, oh, I have a lot of data and I'm
Hmm.
just going to take that data and I'm just going to make the algorithm. It doesn't work like that. It has to be, you have to be very clear. Okay, the one step before that, first you have to know in the larger picture which element do you think you want to use AI. That's point number one. Point number two, once you know that, okay, out of these 100 things that I'm doing, this element could use AI and a little bit of automation, broadly in a non-technical parlance, automation. Then I come to the, if I want to automate this, if I want to use AI, what is the business objective that I need to achieve through this? Once I have identified that business objective, then I think, okay, what data would I need to achieve this business objective? And then it requires a consultation. It depends on the resources and everything. Then it requires a discussion with probably a machine learning engineers, data scientists, and figure out what data you need and how to train an algorithm. So it's this answer is contextual. It's very difficult to answer this broadly and abstract. One needs to go a little deeper. But these, at least in my view, would be your, the element which you want to automate, the business objective that you want to achieve. From there, what data do you need? And that could be through consultations to people who are working in this field on the technical side or on the business side and who've done it, and then figuring out the creation of that algorithm.
Yeah. I think that's a great answer because the one critical thing that comes out is that you can't just feed data and get the output that you require. You need to understand what data you need to feed in, and what's the important thing is what's the business objective that you want to achieve. And third is that whether AI can actually help you to achieve that objective or not.
Correct.
Mm.
Correct.
Yeah.
That's an important. That's excellent. That's absolutely correct. Abhinav, I agree with you, because one thing about artificial intelligence and as growing is that there's also a question before, do does this need AI? You don't need to solve
Yeah.
everything with AI, right? I mean, let's take. I'm just off track for 10 seconds. Computers came. A personal computer, I believe, Macintosh came in the 1980s, right? Now, of course, computers did change our life. It came into our home, and it did, but it doesn't mean that everything needs computers, right? I mean, today also we would still be thinking in our notebooks. We would pen down notebooks. I mean, this is a constant thing for students, right? If there's a student audience there, not everyone takes notes on the laptop. There are students who prefer to take notes on in their notebooks. There are students who like to answer exam questions on paper, right? Because they like handwritten answers. They don't like typing. So it's not as if just because the technology is there, I need to do everything with that technology. Knowing uh, when to use the technology, how to use the technology is a separate aspect, but knowing when to use the technology and useful for me is equally important. So that's an important and an excellent point that you raise up enough, because it raises a very important point. Where to use AI is equally important.
Excellent. Right. Fascinating point so far. So I'm more interested in the community learning. So we talked about how we help each other, how we learn from each other, rewire our brain, more understanding on AI, and apply to it, coming from the problem to the solution rather than going starting with the solution and going to the problem. So talk about the community. Talk about MKAI.
Right. So, like I indicated, so one of the main factors about how I got involved as a non-technical person in artificial intelligence, curiosity, reading is one place, but a major factor was a community called Milton Keynes Artificial Intelligence. As the name suggests, it's based out of UK. It's MKAI. What MKAI does, MKAI is a community of people from different walks of life, which means people from different professions, different age groups, different journeys of AI. No one in that community is portraying themselves to be an AI expert. Everyone is learning. Everyone over there is everyone is figuring out, and no one claims to have the answer. It's a discussion. So why that group is relevant for two, three factors. One, they choose a theme every month, and then they design an event around that theme, which is called the
Mhm.
Inclusive Forum, which I believe happens every Thursday. Now it happens every third Thursday of every month, and they call it guest speakers there. What is so different about MKI is the way it is conducted. It's run by someone called Richard Foster Fletcher, and it's become a big team. It's become a nice, good 5-7 member team now. Is the style in which it's been done. We've been living in a virtual environment for close to 1.5 years now, or more for some people, and the point is that when you enter an MKI event, there's engagement on the chat, there's individual welcoming to a large extent, to the extent possible, individual welcoming of each member, and it's a very inclusive community. You hear those people, and after that there's actually an after party where anyone whose questions have been left out, if they want to ask those questions, they're allowed to ask. Everyone's view is considered important. I think that living in a pandemic, being curious about AI, thinking on AI, having no background in AI, that point, that the approach really struck with me. And then you had the opportunity to join a certain, there's a group on Telegram and there's a group on WhatsApp, I believe. So basically you can have conversations in MKI. And what it did was that we, after the event, you would join this group, and it would be free flowing conversation. You could read on AI, you could start a discussion on AI, and you started discussing AI with people from different parts of the globe. And we are now about, I think, about 300, 400, 500 people, 500 people, I think, on the community with different channels. And MKI, so that pattern continues. One thing is led to another, and now I'm volunteering some of my time as head of community at MKI, and that's one part of the community. So the goal of MKI is to break down artificial intelligence for everyone. That's one point. And the other point on community learning that I do want to bring in is that MKI also led me to another entity, another organization, public charity based of New York, which is called For Humanity, which is one step ahead. So there's awareness creation, and because I'm part of both, and I could just take to explain that awareness creation, MKI, between non-technical people, everyone's important, every view is important. And For Humanity, again, everyone's important, but there's one step ahead of the process, in the sense For Humanity is developing a concept of AI audit, which is developing trust in AI systems in a manner that benefits humanity, and they're doing that in different ways. So I think one of the things about community learning that I've picked up, in to answer that question very quickly, or summarize what I've just said, is that it is about learning from each other, respecting each other's viewpoints, being kind even if you disagree, and realizing that together we are in this journey, because artificial intelligence is that broad that you need to hear out each view. As a matter of fact, if you are actually even developing AI systems, it is beneficial to take as many views as possible, because being stuck with your own biases and on your own thoughts, and you won't even realize you're biased, is by engaging with more people and more diverse backgrounds.
This
Nice.
is this is fantastic. And I and Madhu have learned a lot from MKI community, to be honest. From an audience perspective, how can they join this particular community and benefit from it?
Right. So we have events every month. We have next inclusive event is, I think, on 23rd October. Then I think the third Thursday of every month. So you have an inclusive event. We post on LinkedIn, and predominantly on LinkedIn, and also on Twitter. And we also have the website www.mkai.org, where you have the events section, and you can register for the event, join us in that event, inclusive event, and we then give you an opportunity. Then there's an opportunity for, if you enjoy the event and you think that you're thinking on AI, you're enjoying the event, enjoying the interaction, enjoying the camaraderie, is the main point for people who are from non-technical backgrounds. That's the key point of enjoying the camaraderie, enjoying the community, the way the chat is flowing, the way the event is taking place, and you feel you want to go further, you can come and join us in the conversation. Before the inclusive event, also to open up, and supposing the different time zones in different parts of the globe, especially in Australia, right, because it's a little ahead of UK and BST time, we also have a LinkedIn Live. A little bit of watching that would also work well, and it will give you a good flavor of how the conversation is taking place. And the key point about MKI, even if you've missed out a little bit of what I'm saying here, is that if you are interested and if you're thinking on artificial intelligence and you want to delve deeper into just that own thought, why don't you just come and join, or just see the event, and we'll then figure out how to move forward.
Beautiful.
That's great. Your passion shows when you talk about MKI, so that's really good. Uh, Last question, but a very important one here, is that how can people find purpose in their professional life or career, and more importantly, how can people get inspired to achieve their dreams from your perspective?
So I think the most important element in this is being honest with yourself. You be you. I think I was always told as a child by one of my relatives very close to me, no longer alive, but he said that whenever we dial our own number, it's engaged. because we're not listening to ourselves truly. So the crux of it is that if you understand yourself and you understand your who you are as a person, and you don't need to know all the answers. I mean, life, like we started this conversation, a series of choices. It's not a linear decision. Point A leads to point B, leads to point C. You take one decision, you act on it for 2-3 years, different ways, move on. Like I read something on Buddhism that even if you think you're on the wrong path, if you do it sincerely, you know the door will open. The point is being committed to the path you're on, whether right or wrong. That's all subjective. So the idea is that for people to find that purpose, I think you have to start off with being honest to yourself. Then two, you need to also, after being honest to yourself, probably realize what practically is something that you would like to pursue as a hobby, and what you would like to take a risk and pursue professionally. For example, and I can give it from my own example, I really like theater. I liked script writing and directing. I've directed a fair number of plays. I've almost pretty much scripted most of those plays that I was part of. But I never went into professional acting. I never went to Bollywood in Bombay, or the fact that I want to go into theater. I kept that passion for theater, but I went to law because I felt that no, that's a more, and that, I mean, that's both a pro and a con. I mean, at that point in time when I was making the decision, I didn't want to take that risk. I wanted to, it seemed like a more structured path, so I took that. So I think it's a combination, ability to take risk about knowing yourself, having a sense of what I could do as a hobby and what I could do professionally, and just taking the step and moving forward. I think that's the broadest way of approaching this.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for being with us today. It's been so fascinating, so very good, well spoken, and tons to take away for the audience.
It's my pleasure being here. Thank you, Madhu. Thank you, Abhinav. Absolute pleasure.